Whether you're just getting into tabletop wargaming or maybe you're an event organizer that finds himself in need of several tables worth of terrain that don't look like garbage for an event that's coming up in a couple of weeks, I'm going to show you how to make some quick, easy, relatively cheap tables full of terrain, get you started in the hobby or get you started in making a mass collection. And I'm going to show you a few tips to make sure that it doesn't look like garbage along the way. Show you a few materials that I use, a couple of tools that I use, and just a couple of methods to make sure that you get a decent quality set to start with and something that we can work with moving forward to create a really nice detailed terrain set. But first we need to start with something to put on the table. So I went online, I did a bunch of research, I scrolled through, I looked at what current Warhammer 40k tournament terrain sets look like. That's my game of choice. It was very easy for me to find official terrain maps from the game maker that give me an idea of where to start with what constitutes a full set of terrain. And that's the important thing to know first. What is a full set of terrain for your game? Once you know that, you can start making a plan. This is what a terrain set looks like for me. In 40k, you've got 4 pieces that are 12 inches by 12 inches. They are ruins. You've got 2 pieces here shown to be the brown rectangles that are generally said to be 5 inches by 10 inches. So you've got something a little bit smaller. They vary in what their rules exactly are. I'm going to make them as barricades, maybe put a few extra pieces on them to block some line of sight as well. And then finally, you've got these smaller area terrain pieces. Those can be shipping containers, they can be pieces of woods, something like that, generally said to be about 4 inches by 6 inches. So here's where I start. The most important pieces are going to be these large ruined buildings and these 2 smaller barricades because they're utilized to block most line of sight and fill most of the table, whether you're doing the setup that runs horizontally across the table like terrain setup 1 or terrain setup 2 where those barricades go through the middle of the table. Either way, the area terrain is kind of set off to the side. We're going to hold off on worrying about those in this video because they're going to utilize different methods, but we're going to get these other 6 pieces done today so that we can play a game. So I'll be starting with some foam core. You buy it at the dollar store. I like to utilize the black foam core. It's the same price anyway. If your paint chips away, that black underneath isn't going to show as glaringly as if you've got a white underneath. And since we're utilizing tournament style terrain dimensions here, I'm going to start by cutting the bases for all of these pieces first. So I need 4 12 by 12 squares and I need 2 5 by 10 squares. And now that I've got my bases all cut here, we're going to start with the walls and the structures. And these are just a couple of basic barricades, really, with an extra tall area over here to be line of sight blocking. And these pieces are going to be relatively cheap and easy to build. Between these 2 pieces and the 4 12 by 12 buildings that we're going to build, it's only going to take me 3 sheets of foam core. Now, if you're going to the dollar store, that's $1.25 now a piece. That's going to be $3.75. A bottle of glue from the same place, you're up to $5. Even if you have to find yourself a utility knife of some sort there, you're going to be in for $7 and change after tax to get something rough and ready on the table. But let me show you a few things you can do to make it better right off the bat. If we're starting with this piece, we're going to make a back corner for one of the larger ruins. So we can start with a smaller piece. We're going to keep a flat edge and we're going to cut a ragged edge. I built myself this little 2-window template and I just measured out a couple of windows. I put 2 next to each other so that I would have something to square up the next one with. And I cut this piece of foam core with right angles on the edges here so I can always line them up with a piece of wall and be able to trace them out. I'm just gonna kind of poke at it and say, do something. All right, so now we've got the basic sections and we can start with embellishments. One of the first things that I'm going to show you is this tool right here. And this is going to be a rabbet cutter for the foam board. Now, this particular version isn't manufactured anymore, but I'm going to put a link in the description for something that's very similar. But the cool thing about this tool is that it will allow you to cut a rabbet or a notch onto your foam board and peel it right off like that. Now, instead of having to make an ugly corner like this, where you have this chunky exposed foam,
This little notch that's cut out means that the paper from this side is going to cover the foam on this side, and it's going to give you a much cleaner corner. Now, this is a significant increase in your cost, but compared to what? We're $7 in for the foam core. This is generally like a $20 tool. If you're going to be doing a lot of foam ruins and a lot of builds like this, it's worth having around. It's going to last you forever. Now, another minor thing we're going to do is we're going to take these windows. I'm going to slice a little windowsill out of each of these, and then we're going to glue those on. Now, I'm going to use the window that came out of each of these slots to make sure that it's as square and even with it as it possibly can be. I'm going to get this glued up, and then I'm going to move on to the rest of the set. Oh, and when you inevitably have a piece that you're having trouble holding together until the glue dries, use whatever's available to prop it. This Sculpey box is going to give me a nice right angle, as well as being a heavy block to set everything up against. And now I can just put weights against the walls, and now that's going to hold that corner tight while I'm waiting for the glue to dry. And then I'm going to work on the rest of the pieces, and then we'll do the next big step tomorrow. Let me show you a couple things that I do before I start the painting process. First of all, I measure out a line about 5 inches above the bottom of the building. I like to keep my floors 5 inches apart. It just gives you plenty of room to put your hands under and your models under. Lots of people will go 3 or 4 inches. It's a little bit tighter fit, but it'll get you closer to objectives if you're sitting on a second floor. I'm going to draw a line where I want my second floor to be, and I'm going to make these little supports. And these are just made off of the offcuts of the windows that I cut out of the building. They don't need to be terribly pretty. They're not going to be really visible. They're just going to be the things that the floors sit on. This is going to help support the weight of any minis or anything like that. I'm going to leave this off until after I've painted. And the other thing is falling bombs and any other sort of destructive elements that are going to happen in war are not going to leave these perfectly square edges that we left from cutting here. So it is good to bevel everything. And it doesn't have to be terribly good because it's ruins. So I'm going to go through the entire set and bevel all the edges just to get a little bit extra realism, and then we're going to paint it. All right, we've got our 4 large buildings and our 2 smaller dividers. Everything is put together. Buildings are not glued to the bases. Second and third floors are not glued into the buildings. We're going to do one more last step of paint prep before we spray them. All this exposed foam could be prone to melting or degrading if we use spray paint on it right away. So we're just going to cover it in a black acrylic paint just to protect it before we spray.
Typically, I would use the Rust-Oleum stone textured spray paints in order to do the next step. And then when you spray all of your foam ruins with something like that, you very quickly get a good texture and color that you don't have to do a ton of work to create. You end up with these foam board ruins that end up looking like they're made out of concrete or at least sheathed in some sort of concrete stucco kind of mixture. And it does a lot in a very short amount of time and low effort to make just a cheap, easy set of ruins look better for the tabletop. Now this time I happened to go into the store and see that this stone texture paint is closing in on $20 a can, and I started looking for an alternative. Now I wound up using this Rust-Oleum cement texture paint, and the results were kind of lackluster, I gotta admit. This was $12 a can versus the stone texture $16 or $17 a can. I would buy the stone texture stuff again. With this, you kind of might as well just use like a flat gray primer for as much texture as this gives you. It kind of just came out matte gray. But I did manage to use 1 can to spray the entire set, and now this is what I've got. Let me show you a little bit better close up. So this is what we've got so far. We've got our 4 large buildings, and we've got our 2 little barricades here. Now, in case you're taking a look at this oddly intact tower and wondering what that's about, I bought this little lit post topper. It's meant just to go on top of a 4x4 fence post, and I got it at a discount store for, I want to say, like $5 or $6, and I thought it would make a really good top of a watchtower. So I made this so that that can slide right on top, or I can leave it off depending on what I want to do. It even lights up. There's more work yet to be done on these ruins, and I'm going to continue increasing the level of detail and show you some more tricks in the next video that I make about these. But for now, we've got a full set of terrain. It's enough to play a game, and it's not going to look like I made it earlier in the afternoon in an emergency situation. Stick around, subscribe if you want to see what I'm doing next. I believe my next video is actually going to be about my army storage systems, and then we'll move on to more terrain stuff after that. All right, hopefully I'll see you around.